Welcome to a special edition of the IFBTA's Meet Our Member series. And today it is a special edition because we have one of our leadership member companies being introduced, Worldwide Technology. And leadership is at the top of the chain of our membership categories globally. And I'd like to welcome Jay Custard, who is the lead retail advisor for Worldwide Technology. So welcome to Meet Our Member and the IFBTA.
Rob, super happy to be here. Really appreciate what you do this series and certainly our partnership with IFBTA. So thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of different things. And by the way, I find the term, I think you may be the first time I ever talked to somebody who had the word advisor and advisory in that, because that's a very wide thing. So why don't we just start out with a general introduction to Worldwide Technology? We did do a podcast last year. We had a webinar, but I'm not so sure everybody knows Worldwide Technology and all the areas that you're in.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's one of these best kept secrets. It's a 24 billion global company that's been around for 35 years, but our heritage has really been in the infrastructure space. So at the very emergence of the days of the internet, we were there moving around ones and zeros, and we're the number one partner in the world with some of those IT-led groups. So a lot of IT folks know who we are. So the Ciscos, the Dells, the NVIDIAs, HPE, all of those folks, that's really where we cut our teeth back in the day. But we've gone through all these emergent technology revolutions from cloud to omnichannel and now into the world of AI. And I'm lucky enough to be part of this advisory group, which is really kind of the business consultancy side of it. So infrastructure has always been seen as kind of this cost center or maybe an investment that you have to make. But then 10, 15 years ago, we started layering in the business side of this as well. So that are you not just making these investments to make these investments, but you're trying to gain value and material growth out of these. And that's where I get to spend time. And we do this internationally with about 10,000 employees now. So it's been
And how many different industries is Worldwide in?
Yeah, we touch them all, right? So everything from our PubSec all the way through to manufacturing, life sciences, healthcare, global financial services is a massive one for us. And the advantage of that is that in these emerging technology times, a lot of the paradigms and a lot of the patterns get established, not just in retail, but they start outside of that.
Well, retail itself is a very big area. I mean, the IFBTA knows this because just because we have the word, food service, in what we're doing, or food and beverage, we extend into hospitality, hotel, lodging industry, and the convenience stores, and the general retail. And, because you find that everywhere, and we find a lot of partnerships, and the word retail itself, really covers so many industries, and food and beverage is certainly, within there as well. So what was it, that got Worldwide into the restaurant industry itself, and how long have you been in that sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think any place where you're serving people or employees, there's paradigms to be borrowed from retail. And a few years ago, about 10, 15 years ago, we brought in application delivery. We bought a company that did application. And then we bought a company that was back in the big days of big data, right? Remember those days where that was just emerging. And that led us into customer experience efforts to reconfigure what digital looks like in a new world. And through some partnerships with Panera and Jersey Mike's and Wingstop and a few others, we really kind of help these restaurants tackle technology. Same mission that you have, right? How do you bring technology not to automate hospitality and service, but to automate the things that get in the way of hospitality?
Well, I gotta ask you though. Your company is headquartered in St. Louis. Was Panera one of your first customers?
It was one of our first companies. When they started their digital transformation pieces, we came in to help them just simply rewrite an application. And before you knew it, we were helping them rethink the entire digitization strategy of their stores, from kiosk to digital ordering. And from there, it just blossomed and grew into so many of these other partners that we're lucky enough to work with today.
Well, before they moved their headquarters from Boston officially to St. Louis, or one of their offices there, actually our chapter chair in Boston was from Panera. So,
nice.
And he made that move. But, they also were known in the industry when they talked about Panera 2.0. They were in the industry with really some leading, types of technologies and how they were going to handle it. And for a company their size, it wasn't McDonald's. They were really rebuilding their whole strategy, the drive-through, the pickup lockers, the handhelds. So, being involved in that really gave you guys a lead up in the industry as to what was going to be coming.
It really did. And it gives us such an interesting perspective because there's no shortage of great ideas and need and roadmaps to go do this. Where Worldwide really fits in is, how do we help facilitate the things that tend to get in the way that they're not experts in? We're not always going to have the greatest ideas. We're not always going to set the strategy, but how do you figure out what equipment needs to show up at what stores with the right connectivity, with the right security protocols, with the right change management? So we would bundle kit, distribute that, get that stood up, make sure that software was running so that when the customer came in, it was just something new and it was an experience, and the employees were not worried about throughput or how to make these things
Mhm.
work. It just worked, which is the magic and what's really what we love to do in the hospitality and restaurant space.
Well, if you think about it, you said that you got your start actually in the infrastructure side.
Correct.
And if you consider that, that is probably one of the areas that the food service retail industry, well, not so much maybe retail because you had your big box retailers and you had your grocery and people like that, but certainly the restaurant industry, infrastructure was one of those hardest things to convince people to do, especially in a franchised environment. And
Yeah.
yet you build that as your core, you bring it in, and now everything is built on that. You were sort of ahead of your game on that one before our industry caught up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, to your point, we did a lot with big box and we've done a lot with, hotel chains where that stuff needs to be always buttoned up and they had more control over it. And to your point, the franchisee business model is very different. There isn't necessarily an established technology estate. It's kind of left up in some organizations to that. But what we're finding now is that store tech modernization is the biggest priority for a lot of the customers we serve, for the simple fact that they're not bad systems. They're just undesigned systems. Lots of point solutions that were brought, decisions that were made in good decisions made in isolation, but made in isolation nonetheless.
We
So,
call we call them made in silos, right? You have a
absolutely.
need, you choose it, you put it in a silo, but
Yeah.
you didn't necessarily think about the overall strategy and how they were going to fit together holistically.
It's exactly right. And now with this whole new world of AI opportunities and what are we going to do with agentic, that fragmentation is not necessarily something that we can cover over anymore, right? The execution variability from shift to shift, store to store, manager to manager, that level of fragmented data is actually something that we're trying to help put together, not because we're going to have the perfect solution for today, but we're trying to provide flexibility, scalability, and variability because we know the world is going to infinitely change on us around us by tomorrow, right? So, how do we build an ecosystem that allows for that flexibility and scalability while keeping it all secure? That's the challenge.
Well, as I think about it, I've pointed out already a couple times that you guys were sort of ahead of the curve, at least for the restaurant industry, that it was there. But then you teamed up with somebody who is really making some inroads in it. And you think about the siloed practices, but I also think of the word digital.
Yeah.
And I do note that before we came on here, we talked about a past title you might have had that had digital in it. But
Yeah.
what I find and now you're doing advisory, so I get that. But when I think about it, look at how many restaurant companies today are struggling with, do they have a chief digital officer? Do they have a chief technology officer? Or do they have a chief information officer? And I think they're actually landing on the word digital.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We joke all the time as my digital advisory friends and I, we laugh. It's like, well, it's all ones and zeros. We've been digital since 1993, whenever this company was founded, right? But it's almost as if we try to take something like digital, which is unknown, doesn't fit neatly into an organizational chart. It kind of doesn't have bounds, right? It kind of runs this way, which retailers like things to move this way. And so I think what digital has done is become kind of the encapsulation of better customer, better employee experiences so that we can try to take these technology investments, think about them differently, not from the IT procurement side or just something that we have to do, but how do you turn these into things that materially move the business so that we can use these technologies to make that customer experience seamless and to make that employee that much more valuable and get the commoditized work off their plate so that they can do what they're great at, which is serving.
And you know what? That definition of digital, though, has really changed over the last few years because it's not just about the employees and the management, the stakeholders, but also you're connected with the customers.
Absolutely.
And, what I found is interesting. If you started in retail and you end up in food service, in the food service side for years, we always thought that, oh, all technology happened in retail. And
Right.
now it seems like when it goes to drive-through technologies and you look at distributed systems and things like that, retail has really been learning from the food service restaurant industry now and global, as well. Retailers were not always global, but restaurants were.
Yeah, I think that anytime you're one on one with a consumer trying to move things through, get them what they want, help them navigate menu choices, help them take that cognitive load off, help things be frictionless, help them just get on with their day, there's lessons learned across any industry. So while I steal ideas from all these other parts and pieces around the organization, a lot of what we do in retail manifests back out, right, in the same way, because it's one on one. You're serving a person at their time of need. They want it quickly, they want it streamlined, and they have more avenues to get it. And by the way, they can just drive two more stops down the road and get something very, very different, or order very differently and have it
Well,
right
that's
at
true.
home. So a lot of
So,
change coming.
so if we think about, so let's focus on that, a lot of change coming out there. So what are the key areas of focus both for worldwide and also food service companies where you guys come together?
Yeah. So the big framework that I would say is when I spent money in retail in the old days, right, it was really about customer experience. There was never a shortage of dollars as long as I could justify some sort of an ROAS or ROI on the front end. The value that we're seeing now and where we're seeing companies really invest, it's really an executional variability of the stores. So things like demand forecasting, inventory visibility, shrink, employee labor scheduling, it's really on the back side of the business. The things that were kind of below the line, if you will, around how you kind of drive margin is you can control costs. But what we're seeing is a lot of application of ML and AI tooling to really help do some of those things that allow that customer experience to be seamless. So, do I have the right product at the right place? Am I moving it at the right time? Am I doing it in a way where I'm not causing shrink? Am I making sure that my employees are trained? They want to stay, they understand. Like it's really kind of on the back end, and even going so far as AI native engineering at the back of house to modernize applications that much faster with coding assistance so that we can continue to evolve and elevate what we can't control, which is that customer experience side oftentimes.
Well, if you think about it, there's a lot to be brought to the table that comes from retail into the food service industry. We see more and more even of the quick service segment moving to fresh food,
For sure.
and that in itself has its inventory pieces. But what you really have is a manufacturing plant that's at
Exactly right.
each of these places. And
Yep.
then you have staff and demand, and there's a lot more information available as well. So how does that all play into the picture? And do the food service operators actually realize what opportunity there is there?
I think they're starting to. I think if you go back to that one word fragmentation, I think there was a lot of times where an operations person might look at the things that they're accountable for and try to maximize within that particular silo. Loyalty and marketing are maximizing within the particular silo. There's parts and pieces happening on the front on the financial side. I think what we're starting to see is that there's an acknowledgement that to truly fully understand and take value and understand how to move these businesses forward is that there has to be a connectivity of this information and an understanding of the incentives outside of whatever that particular domain is that I own within this organization. So what we're starting to see is how do you build consistency? We're not talking about perfection because I think there's a lot of underlying. If you want to take advantage of AI, you got to get your data state perfect. You've got to have all these things ready to roll. But AI tools actually help us make sense of unstructured data. It helps us make connections between these. And the companies that are really innovating are the ones who realize that the more this connected this information is and the insights that can be spun out of that using some of these models or these tools are the ones who are able to really find margin on the back end that they can control, they can turn back into investment to really continue to separate themselves in the space. But you're right.
But it's not
Just in
it's not
time
just
manufacturing.
something that the big guys use, right? It's something that goes all the way down to the independent, the small to medium business, and then the franchisee. So
Absolutely.
how do you see the adoption rate, between the different groups? It used to be if you wanted new innovation, you go to the small little operator who can bring it and move more, they're more agile, they can move quicker.
Yeah.
But, how do you see the adoption rate, both, by the way, just in the US, but also outside in the rest of the world within the industry?
Yeah, adoption is tied to can you show me material impact, right? So we did a large project around demand forecasting, moving from kind of manual gut feel, how do we do this? This is the way I've always done it. How much do I need here to a unified model that took in a lot of different inputs, sporting events in the area, weather, traffic patterns, just behavioral information. But what we've had to do is we've had to kind of show the difference. That's where we've seen a lot more of the adaptability of these things, especially when you get down to the franchisee level, where they kind of own their own little mini P&L, and they have to be convinced because this is an additional cost for them, which could mean, a lot of impact on their bottom line. So it's kind of showing that compare and contrast and just slowly stepping forward to drive these new technologies in that have a valuable and demonstrable ROI associated with them to paint that picture larger so that you can kind of gain that momentum moving forward.
Well, in the old days, which weren't so long ago, you had to convince franchisees to make that investment in technology. And it was two things. First of all, that they had to buy something. Do I buy an oven or do I buy a cash
Right.
register? Right. And then the second part was once they started moving things to the cloud and they had to be connected, uh, why do I have to get a, managed service? Why do I have to have that infrastructure?
Right.
I'll just go down the street and just get $30 a month service and
Yep.
some hardware, throw it in there. I would think that today they don't question those things as much as they did because they realize they have to do it. But where then are the adoption, challenges that you may still have in a distributed environment?
Yeah, I think it's about getting that their momentum, right? Because I think even in some of what you find in especially in the franchise model is that there's going to be those that are early adopters. They're going to find value. They're constantly seeking. They're the ones who are pushing some of the larger organizations at the corporate level to get me better tools, help me figure this stuff out. And they're finding things on their own and bringing that back in. Once you get enough of that momentum with those early adopters within that, and you can start to see these material gains, people then latch onto that and then want that to happen. Our job at Worldwide is how do you make that scalable? How do you make that fungible for them? How do you even do that in a way where if we need to, we can absorb some of that financial risk so that these tools can go into deployment and we can figure out a different consumption model for those because it could be that these smaller operators that only own one or two stores that is their livelihood are not willing to make that investment. So there's all kinds of ways to get that done. But what we find is working at the franchisor and franchisee level, being in front of them, producing these new things, spending times in stores. A lot of our technologists will go and make pizzas. We'll go and do wings. We'll be in the store. We'll run drive-throughs because that's the way you start to build credibility in these spaces. Show these technology pieces that are not going to replace the most valuable person in the loop, which is often the store manager or that person at the drive-through window. But how do you take a good employee, turn them great, and how do you take a great employee and turn them
Well, and how do
legendary?
you take their knowledge and you spread it to other people as well, right?
Everything, right? That's the thing. The one differentiator when we look across execution variability in these stores, it often comes down to that store manager. That store manager has been there, they're tenured, they have so much expertise. What can we do to one, glean that information, get that out so that some of these frontier models can chew on that and build tooling? But then also, what do we give them during the heat of their shifts so that they're watching things that they don't need to watch necessarily? How do we know where we've got some risk things? What do we know about queuing? What do we know about demand? What do we know about things that are happening in the store for preventative maintenance so that we can make them that much more valuable? And the world is open up.
Is there a sweet spot? Are there companies that are too small to work with you or too large? Well, they're probably not too large, but is there something in it where you touch really everybody? Because we have talked about franchisees, and some franchisees can be one unit, right? So,
Sure.
how do you divide the world and the industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, in years past, Worldwide tends to work with, the Fortune 100. It's a very large organization, but we acquired a company called SoftChoice a year ago out of Canada. So we now have the ability to serve both the enterprise customer with business models that will go with the largest of the large, but then we also have the availability to go and serve customers at a much lower, smaller level because we have different models, and that's the reality of that space. What I would say is it's less about size, it's more about opportunity and innovation and where they want to spend time. We're not above speaking to anyone because we know that there are chains that maybe are 20, 25 stores at this point, but are quickly moving. It's the right profile of folks who want to understand the industry. They want to hear what's happening in the space. We learn from them just as much as they can learn from us. And then we can help facilitate some of these parts and pieces to make it work. And I will say, the beginnings of AI driven customer service on the consulting side has allowed us to be that much quicker, that much more nimble.
Mhm.
So there isn't really necessarily a size limit. It's more around Do we want to look for ways together to drive technology to make your business better and to expand quickly? We're probably a pretty good person to at least have a good
Well,
conversation
I
about.
think you pointed out some, interesting pieces there because the growth curve of somebody that's 20 units, 30 units, they could go international in a moment, which
Really.
adds its own complexity in there. But I also think the growth of new opportunities in new locations. You go through the airport, you see, fresh food vending, that's out there, which is really in some cases restaurant in a box, which is something that we're working on. You'll see Wow Bao out there. I saw California Pizza Kitchen at a show a couple weeks ago, in a kiosk making fresh pizzas. So,
Yeah.
the new opportunities. You also mentioned earlier about stadiums, arenas, you
Hmm.
know, the new places that people show up, the footprint is much different. And so you could be out there with 1,000 locations just through vending or just through actually virtual locations, just doing,
Absolutely.
dark kitchens and delivery. So there's really no real telling as to where those touch points are going to be.
Not at all. No. And I think if there's a technology, innovation, AI lens with the way that they're expanding, then we're probably a pretty good fit. But we know there's been such rapid change. I know how retail works. It used to be spend money to open doors. And we still find a lot of franchisors that their job and where they want to invest at the corporate level is how do I convince someone to buy one of my franchisees and get that out the door and open? And that's fine. We often see that go. But then they often come back and say, you know what, we didn't invest in loyalty because we didn't need to, because we had a hot brand and it was growing, or we built all these things and now we don't have a consistent stack or a consistent set of insights and it's hurting the EBITDA at the franchisor level. Can you help us come in and right?
Well, you know what? I mean, I'd like to go back into some things that you talked about in the first half here because I
Sure.
think there's some points I wouldn't want to miss here. So I get that the franchisor may be investing in finding new sites, but also your tech stack is part of your asset.
Correct.
And if you're getting franchisees or people who invest, some are sophisticated ones. Those are the people that run multi-unit or some college universities. Your Aramarks, your Sodexos, people like that.
Right.
Your Compass Group. But you also have people that may be in multi-industry or they're investing and they don't know about these pieces yet. They have to be able to use them. And
Mhm.
you said something earlier about tech investment in there. There are a lot of new models, especially when you're talking about AI. I mean, I'm trying to choose personally between 5 different AI models out there, and each one
Yeah.
does something different than the other. And by the way, those costs are racking up as I, try to use the different things there. I can only imagine what that does, for the restaurateur and then down to the franchisee.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about it, you also don't want to increase the operating budget or the capex, when you're
Correct.
building, because the higher the operating budget, all of these models are monthly fees, right?
Absolutely.
All of them. So how can you help to bring that together? Because you did mention that, how can you help to bring that together into a singular solution for somebody?
Yeah, it's a great question. And oftentimes it's not a singular solution. It's more of a package of ideas or or of stacks that you can choose from. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is maybe I didn't, but worldwide is privately held, right? And the advantage
You
of that
did.
is that we get to take some chances that maybe others don't. So what I would tell you is we have a thing called the ATC, the Advanced Technology Center. And really what this is a place where we have $1 billion invested in this. So everything from just simple infrastructure, data center type things, all the way through hybrid cloud, colo, and then including all the new AI tools that exist, we can help bring CIOs or the franchisor together to sit through and test these things out. A lot of this can be done virtually, and a lot of this is just simply the cost of admission is an email on our website, a work email. So that's what we have been doing is helping kind of think through this because we can show how these devices are going to work with this particular connectivity, what edge devices and a compute might need to be there, what a cloud strategy could look like. Do you need data centers? We can help configure all of that on the back end so that when you come out to roll out what a standardized stack might look like in package A, B, and C, it's already vetted. And then we have the advantage of when you're thinking about hardware refreshes or bringing in new partners and new kiosks, we're partnering with all of them, POS systems. We can bring those into that lab, replicate your environment, understand the pros, cons of that, and have a better total cost of ownership, as well as the operational impact and change management structures so that no one's going into this blind. And that to me is a huge advantage as the world continues to shift. hardware continues to evolve, the experiences continue to be, in different demands. There's got to be a way by which we can have some control of these things and build an estate that allows for growth, but also in a secure and scalable fashion that we can afford to own.
Well, you bring up something. We've just spent our time so far talking about, connections with the operators and those that run them. But what about the suppliers? Because you have to have the partnerships on their end as well. And I'm going to guess that some of those suppliers are your customers as well.
It's very true. We have a lot of deep, deep relationships with most of the technology OEMs around the world. And then we've got an entire universe of partners that we're building that are specific to the retail, QSR, convenience, grocery space, by which we're always looking for new ways to partner together, look for the patterns that make sense, and figure out better ways to show up in a unified way. We have a saying here that we absolutely have an opinion. We're not Switzerland, but we're agnostic when we evaluate the technology and look for the best solution for the problem that we've helped articulate. We will have a point of view on a lot of these choices, but that only comes through a lot of trial and error and a lot of the development. We're often sometimes testing some of the gear before it is even released for some of the larger OEMs. So that is one of the
Right.
huge advantages of worldwide.
Well, that does mean, though, that if you're going to be agnostic in there, so you're making a decision as a company, not necessarily to go into the point of sale business or something, but
Correct.
to actually work across the board, realizing, by
Yeah.
the way, there isn't probably a single platform that'll work globally because of fiscal and some of the other things that are out there. So
Yeah.
uh, it's better to be able to be in a position to advise and help somebody choose what's best for them,
Absolutely.
than necessarily, always offering those solutions that are there. So
Absolutely.
we talk about your practice and being in advisory, and also you have peers that are in other industries.
Correct.
Use a lot of industries and global. So,
Yep.
what is it that we should be learning in the restaurant food service industry that, from your experience, you're seeing? Are there some things we haven't taken advantage of, either globally or, yeah, even here in the North America between the other industries?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that comes up again and again, the things that I steal most from, again, I talk to my manufacturing peers. Manufacturers have put, they understand process controls, they understand consistency, they understand throughput. And a restaurant is nothing but just in time manufacturing in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of good things there. The thing that I steal more often than not is as we start talking about taking this fragmentation and turning it into something consistent, this data estate, we are constantly looking at some of the more regulated industries around what does good data governance look like? What does great security look like? Because everything in this space, when you're serving customers, your brand is your trust. If we have a breach, if we have data that's getting out there, if we're using data inconsistently in these personalization tools that freak people out, then they're not going to want to come back to you. You've lost something. So where I spend a lot of my time is understanding what is relevant from a data governance. What does good look like? What needs to be there so that we're not trying to over orchestrate all the data organization, but how are we keeping it secure? How are we providing the right access? And more importantly, what are those AI tools and models? You mentioned there's more out there than we can even get from our own, personal usage of them. But what are those tools that are actually driving material impact? Because I do think that there's a big component of that has not hit the back end of our restaurants yet. So much of this stuff has really been on the customer experience side. The real value is going to be kind of in those operational pieces behind the scenes where we have much more control of our margin. Then we can go figure out how to continue to serve the customer and take more share.
Well, you're bringing up a lot of different subjects on this, and as I'm sitting, if I had a bubble like above my head, and I'm like thinking about, if you were able to see what I'm thinking about right now, you know, we hear a lot of people are questioning, what is AI? How are they going to do it?
Yeah.
They're scared of certain words that are used. The public worries about labor, of getting rid of labor in there, which I don't think
Yeah.
is, really the thing in the hospitality business, because we are finding new ways to do this.
Yep.
But as I think about it, do we really need to talk about AI, or as an advisor, are you really showing people how to embed it so they don't have to make the choice between the different models and the different systems, and they don't have to think about whether it's agentic or whatever it is that they should learn about, because there's so many data sources, so many different things. How do you make it, how do you give them the easy button, right? To do this.
Yeah, I think it's forgetting about the tool and getting to the part of what is the problem you're trying to solve for. Like as an advisor, my role is not to lead with technology. It is not I don't have that depth. That's why we have what we have at Worldwide, all this engineering experience, all these partnerships. are we accurately articulating the problem at hand and continually refining that problem? That is what we're going to find to be the biggest advantage of AI and the biggest paradigm shift. This is not about the answer any longer. This is about asking the question and making sure the question is the right one, or at least the right one today.
Or
And
knowing how to ask the question, right?
well, the prompt will come, right? But I think it's even the articulation of that. Even when we've started to roll out some of these AI native engineering tools that are showing that maybe the code wasn't the bottleneck, it still squeezes the balloon back to, well, what were we trying to do with this code? Because now that timeline is compressed. Same thing with all these AI type tools. There's so much out there. There's so much to think through on this. It is, can we sit down together, use the context of other industries plus what we're seeing in the space to make sure you're identifying the use cases and the business outcome you want solved with the right problem set. And then the technology tends to flow out of that. I'm so tired of talking about AI like everyone. It's more around the types of tools that we're bringing to bear that are enabled by this new level.
Just
Oh,
show people the way, right?
absolutely.
What it is they can do, and they'll understand that, and then they'll say, wow, what else can I do,
Absolutely.
that's in there. I think that that really is a very key theme. It also probably is why your company gives you an advisory role in it, because that's really what you are. But you did say early on, it's not all about knowing the tech. Even if you send your people out to go make pizzas and things, you got to have a strong partnership with the operators who bring the ideas to the table as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think any company in this space, the ones who tend to I won't say get it wrong, but the ones who succeed, let's put it this way. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. They are not trying to automate service or hospitality. They are trying to automate the things that get in the way of that. And that is where we're finding these companies are very, very successful. But they're also sometimes not tied back into a particular business outcome. I've been part of multiple computer vision pilots, automated drive-through pilots, demand forecasting pilots. There's lots and lots of these things, and there's amazing stuff happening in that space. They tend to go die on the vine. I was just at a massive specialty retailer who has some of the best in-store experience in the world, and we were demoing a hologram type device by which that would take over and provide guidance around the store and product objectivity. But
Minority Report,
right.
you
But if
know.
it's not tied back, two words, two words. This is what I tell all my customers. If you can't articulate to me the value of your employee or customer through two lenses, relevance or utility, you probably shouldn't do it. And it's got to go beyond. If it can do both, fantastic. But you can have something that's really cool, but if it's not integrated into utility for your customer or relevant for them, then it's a science experiment. And that's a great thing. You should still learn from that. But man, you've got to get back to
I
relevance.
think what you're saying is you're bringing it down to the level of it's not technology for technology's sake,
Right.
but it's really, as you said, you need to define the problem or what the bottlenecks are, and then it's your role to go ahead and find those solutions and help the partner to do it. So, we are thrilled, at the IFBTA to have you guys on board with us. The word leadership sort of an interesting thing. It is the membership that you guys are at, which just talks about, your level within the industry and your support. But in reality, it's about putting ideas together in there. So what was it that brought, worldwide technology to the IFBTA?
I think given where we are in this evolution, right? I've been through mobile, I've been through cloud, I've been through omni-channel. I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet. I think AI has thrown all of us for a loop because there is so much more to this. I think there's a lot of people that are really, really good at kind of painting a future vision. I think that's hard, right? My take is I'm more of a presentist. So can we accurately, thoroughly, and contextually describe the present so that we can then start to lay the foundation for where we want our futures to be? I think that's important. And being part of a group like IFBTA is we have to show up with ideas. But we also have to show up in the spirit of true leadership with a lot of ears, right? We have to listen and we want to bring context, but we have to understand the context of what's happening in the industry, where challenges really are. So if we feel like we can do that, that gets us closer to that thorough understanding of today so that we're all building this better future for tomorrow, anchored around what do our customers and what do our employees need. And if we stay focused on that contextually, then I think we're off in a great space. And we need groups like this to share these ideas because the path is yet uncharted. We're all going to have to fumble around for a little while to get there. but it's going to be a fun journey. But we're all
But you're helping people to build that base today for where they need to be tomorrow. And,
we have to
there's
do
only
better.
so much time, money, and resources, and that's what you're helping them to do.
That's exactly right. That's what we're trying to do. But we need interaction. We need people to spend time and to share these ideas and these concepts and what's winning, what's working, and to push us harder to invest in the right places to bring that context to the industry because it's so important. And the expectations are not going to slow down from a customer employee perspective. That's for sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to a lot more conversations. I'm also looking forward to an invite in my inbox to come to the innovation center you have, because I think that would, well, you're telling me I could do it virtually, but I'm not going to make the virtual. I want to see how all the pieces go together in there. So, Jay, thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate your representing worldwide. I really appreciate your representing worldwide technology as a leadership member of the IFBTA and joining us for this Meet Our Member. And I'm sure this will be the start of many similar conversations in the future, maybe some brainstorming ones.
I look forward to it. And thanks for all that IFBTA does. Thanks for having us as part of the community. And we look forward to creating a better world for everybody that has consumers and customers and employees, because it's only going to get better from here.
It is. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. And thank you for being a part of the IFBTA. And thank you to our audience for joining us today for this Meet Our Member series with Worldwide Technology, a leadership member of the IFBTA.